Welcome everybody to this week's meeting. I did not put together a comprehensive agenda, just a couple of items. One, review the outstanding items for milestone 1 release. 2, the Parquet and OMOP subgroups, and then anybody having any walk-on topics. So I'm Bashir, hey Gil. So yeah, let's get started on that. Outstanding items similar to last week. Let's see here. We had, I think John, you had some updates here. Yep. So thank you, John, for cleaning out some of the older topics here. And I think you said there's only one issue that needs to be addressed, and that was my PR, I think, right? Was that true?
I don't think that really needs to be a blocker for us sort of saying this is V2 of the spec. So unless anyone else has sort of any other sort of outstanding things they think need to be done to the spec before we finalize it this year.
Yeah, there is one item that every week comes into the to-do list. I think, I don't know, maybe 2-3 months ago, it was assigned to me. It's this GitHub ticket for exclusions of tests. And I'm not sure, I mean, I remember that I raised it in one of the meetings a long time ago. And what we did is that we skipped some of the tests that, we know for some reason, our engine doesn't handle. And then in the report that we generate, which is being published, there's like a reason field or something for the tests that are being skipped. So that's how we handle it. Do you guys still think this is an issue that, needs to be, baked into the, I don't know, test framework or something?
Like different groups of tests, like some of which fell into the required basket and some which were like optional and that sort of thing. But I'm not sure that we ended up with any in the suite that are really in the optional basket, I don't think.
Yeah, I can quickly check the ones that we have, but one thing that I clearly remember is join. So when there was a join in the FHIR path and it didn't have any argument. And I think from one version of FHIR to the other one, actually the spec changed and at some point it required, I think, a argument. And then at some point it was dropped, that requirement, and there was a default. So for some of the FHIR implementations, like, when we were doing it for, let's say, R4 or STU3, it was failing. And I think for R5, it was passing, something like that. So I just, excluded that test, for example. And I know that there was also with the boundaries. I mean, the boundaries are also excluded, but you know why.
I think it's a good idea to have like some sort of reason thing in the report for like situations of like where you would need to sort of communicate that this implementation can't pass this for some reason. Yeah, I'm not sure if we need any change to the actual tests themselves. It sounds like some of these things might be, yeah, as you say, FHIR path moving around and that sort of thing. I think as long as we keep our tests sort of focused on the mandatory aspects of our spec, and also implementation agnostic is a really important one as well. I think we need to make sure that we create tests that are capable of being run across diverse set of implementations with consistent results. As long as we've got that, I think we're good.
But in
terms of the, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, maybe we should like think twice, because if the FHIR engines, if there's really this problem, like, so some FHIR engine do not support join without parameters, maybe we in our subset we still should like say, okay, the parameter is required, and put this test with empty parameters as an optional extra, as we discussed, like tests which may be skipped by implementations. So
yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I mean, when I made some changes to the test framework, the report, I added the reason. So right now there is a reason. If you have, like, you may say past false, and then you may have a reason why, and you can specify that.
Maybe maybe we should, if it's skip it, is it skip it or fail it? So that's interesting for me. Do you want to skip it or just fail it with a reason?
Well, for us it fails, but I have I have some special code to exclude some of the tests by name, because otherwise, our whole, continuous build will fail. Basically,
we can show more nice icon than just fail with a comment. So we can introduce like the different status, like fail it, passed, and skipped. Yes. So, and you can provide the reason why skipped or.
I see. Now, I also like the idea that you mentioned that, if there are things that are, from FHIR implementation to FHIR implementation, it's different, then maybe we mark them as optional.
Yeah.
So that can be an action item. I mean, if everybody agrees, I can do that. I mean, I can mark those that I know have problems with FHIR engines that we are using, mark them as optional.
Yeah, let's do this, because I think you are not the only one implementation which will face this problem.
Okay, so then I will update that action item on my side. Instead of having this option for skipping, basically I will just make some of the tests optional and I add that to the test spec. Sounds good to everyone?
But yeah, I completely believe you that that's changed. And I guess this is also a problem of pointing to the edge version of FHIR. I mean, we could point to like the published version of FHIR. The only problem with that is that it doesn't contain everything that we've chosen to take in, I think. So I'm not sure what people think about that. Should we be pointing to a release version of FHIR and to the edge by exception?
So my understanding of FHIR versioning, a little bit, I'm not exactly sure if my understanding is correct. So it has its own compared to FHIR versions, right? And I think, I mean, the way that, I discovered this particular problem is that, like, the FHIR engine that comes with Happy for when you choose, like, R4, for example, was failing on this test. And I think for R5, maybe it was passing, something like that. So I guess, I mean, I like the idea that, if there are, I mean, if it's possible that, we add constraints such that, it works for all versions. For this example, we would, as Nicola said, that, we say join has to have an argument. I think that's their approach. Otherwise, maybe we should be more clear about the FHIR version that we need.
Yeah, okay, I know what it is now. I think we have done it by exception. I think we've pointed to a release version for all the boundary functions and join. So, and that's because those don't exist in a release version of FHIR yet. So yeah, I think we've probably done the best we can there. I mean, the other thing we could do is spec it ourselves, right? So we could effectively copy the spec into our own specification just to lock it down in lieu of it being in a release version of FHIR.
I'll just provide the clarification for this specific function.
And I guess the other part is like out of the spec. So we've effectively clarified it in the test, right? But is that a normative part of our spec or not?
Yeah,
Sorry, say that again?
I would love to see this test as a part of the spec. It's a good artifact. Yeah.
Sorry, do we have any idea when the next release version of FHIR would be released?
You can ask. There's a lot of dialects, yeah. So there's a SQL dialect, there's a FHIR dialect, 2 versions of FHIR. I don't know. Maybe at least we have our. Maybe there are a few others.
Yeah, I mean, so there's the core FHIR specification, and then like yes, others will add additional functions to it, like we did with the FHIR, and we are as well. So yeah, I don't know I don't know about any release schedule there either. So we have to ping that for more specifics in that space.
Sure. Did you want to say something?
I missed John's point, but I guess we are over that.
And John did ask, and I think Nikolai responded yes, but just to confirm, or with the group, the idea that the tests are a part of the spec, right, or a normative part of the spec.
What does it mean to be part of?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
after released, or
yeah, I think might need to what that means exactly.
No, but I guess there is also like another aspect in general that when we are talking about FHIR, which version are we talking about? Like, I mean, in our spec, I think we need to clarify that.
What do people think of that?
Yeah, we have links that, like I say, point to the versioned FHIR spec in all cases except for, I think, this boundary functions and join. So I don't know, perhaps this conversation is making me a little bit nervous actually, because I think we're a little bit exposed here. Like, should we actually have things in the spec which are not really well defined? Or should they be kind of in the optional basket? So I think, yeah, it is potentially a problem if we say we're either pointing to edge FHIR or we've got tests which assume certain behavior of things that are not very well defined, like the boundary functions. So I guess we just need to make a decision, do we add a version with that as sort of normative content or not? And I'm thinking maybe that's not a very good idea, actually. If it's not fully defined and we can point to a stable version of it, possibly it doesn't belong in our stable version of our spec.
Yeah, that sounds good to have it in optional bucket or incubation bucket and only use what's quite stable.
I mean, this is milestone 1. There'll be milestone 2 potentially, right? That what John said makes sense to me, at least, to say, these functions that we are using are not locked down in terms of specification. Note that in the spec, and then note, to Bashir's point, I think it's Bashir, if you made the point, like the rest of the spec and content relates to that setup makes sense to me. Does that work for the rest of the group?
Are you suggesting that, we go with like Nicolas' suggestion that if we can add constraints that work for all versions, then we do that?
I was talking about the spec itself,
Right.
not necessarily the test, but
Yeah.
So I would say, what was the choices again? Sorry.
So for the spec itself, forget about the test. For the spec itself, I think that at least I see two options. One is that we say, the FHIR implementation should comply with, so and so version of FHIR. So that's one approach, and that makes it clear. Then there is no ambiguity. Right. The other approach is that we add constraint, like, if it's possible, like, for join, for example, we add a constraint saying that, there should be an argument because we want the spec to work with this and this and this version of FHIR. So we want our spec to be compatible with multiple versions of the FHIR. This is the second choice. The first choice is that, we anchor on a specific FHIR.
Yeah, the problem is, I was just going to respond to that. But the problem is that there is no version of FHIR for this particular function. So if we were to add a constraint, then we're effectively forking the edge of FHIR, which can then diverge. And we're kind of creating our own spec of it, I suppose. Defined, I think if we defined it, like we added it into our spec, that's slightly better, but then that's also problematic because as FHIR evolves and gets finalized, then SQL on FHIR is potentially out of step with FHIR is defining the same. And then we have sort of two definitions of the same function, one in FHIR and one in SQL on FHIR. And I think the third option is we take it out of our spec and it becomes like something that implementations might implement, but it doesn't make it into our spec until we can actually point at a stable version of the FHIR spec, which locks it down, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was generally how I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I like how it is in FHIR schema. So if you look at JSON schema, so in JSON schema, there is a lot of draft keywords, and only a few of them become standard. So, and the draft mean that there is no commitment, and we can still change. And for stuff like boundary function, we can label it as a draft or optional and decide eventually, when it's gonna be stabilized, so we can make it like standard, not draft. So it is good to have these experimental draft features, to play with them, still having them in a specification, so people can try to implement, can play with it. But so there is a lot of draft keywords in JSON schema, which like there for 5 years, they never become the part of the standard, but they still present.
Just for consensus in the group, the idea of making it explicit what version of FHIR the spec is targeting, and then labeling functions like boundary functions to be optional with a note that suggests like this may not work across all systems or versions of FHIR, and then work with the FHIR community, but the spec itself targets a fixed version of FHIR. That's the
version. But the fixed version is the leading edge, basically.
But not edge. That would be my thought. I mean, John.
Yeah. The edge is not a fixed version. The edge is just a continuous integration build. There'll be, for our sort of required normative bit of our spec, we want to be pointing to only the released FHIR spec. So I think what you said, Arjun, is right. We need to sort of make that change in the spec and possibly sort of demote the things that we can't point to a stable spec for. But the part that we haven't talked about, and circling back to Bashir's question, is like, how do we reflect that in the tests? So the tests that point to these functions, do we keep them? Do we move them into a separate section of the test which has some sort of different status? In the case of join, we actually use it in examples and things like that. Do we need to change our examples if that's not actually going to be a core part of our specification? Yeah, that's the only other part that I think we haven't landed on yet.
Sorry, John, when you say the released version, is the one that the link that I put in the chat, is that what the one you're talking about? Because I can't find join in there.
I think that's the reason why the join and the boundary reference are different.
N1 is the latest normative release of, well, they also call it version 2.0.0, but that is a proper release. But if you go to, but we are actually pointed for all the join function and the boundary functions. We're actually currently pointed to this one, which is a moving target.
Right. So then your suggestion was to basically keep it the way that it is, or because I thought you were suggesting that, pick a version.
My suggestion is that we, yes, absolutely pick a version. So like say this N1, but the issue is that join and boundary functions are not in N1, right? So we need to take those two functions and sort of, as Arjun said, kind of somehow move them out of the mandatory normative part of the spec and flag them as being pointing to a moving target. So I think there's a PR there to update the spec in that respect so that we're not sort of pinning our normative onto some sort of shaky foundation. And then with the tests, so to come back to your question, Bashir, reliable, consistent execution, I think, is to your point, Bashir.
So how about adding like an optional field to the tests? So keep the tests and then have an extra field saying that, this is option.
Yeah, something like that, which kind of effectively partitions the test suite into 2 bits. And you could put other things in there like that are optional, like the terminology functions or whatever. And then it sort of can be optionally run by, but it's not like a core requirement. And the expectations in it can change without us necessarily changing the semantics of our, nice stable version of our spec. If we're regarding the mandatory part of the test as part of our spec, yeah. I hope I'm explaining that properly.
I think it made sense to me, to suggestion being to add an optional field or tag to the tests. I'm not sure exactly how that might be structured. I was thinking that we might have like different directories or something, but obviously noting them in the tests themselves probably is better. And then, considering non-optional tests to be a part of the specification, which, makes sense, having a test suite that we give that status to me. So got a thumbs up from Bashir. Any other thoughts from the group on that proposal? Are people comfortable with it?
So
just for that.
Yeah, just to wrap this up, and I'm glad actually that I raised it from a test perspective, but now it's actually about the spec. So do we want to mark it, like, let's say for join, for example, do we want every test that has join to be marked as optional, or only those tests that have join without an argument?
I think they all have to be optional because join doesn't exist in a release of FHIR.
Yeah, makes sense.
So tomorrow it could be completely changed. That the meaning of join is the reality of it.
Okay, I'm noting that down. This as a decision. John, you mentioned this as an aside, but we need a decision on it too. Change the examples. I don't know if you haven't. I mean, you might have an idea of which examples use these functions that would be marked as optional or non-normative.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? If there's only one, it could be in the narrative and say this is using an optional feature.
It's actually the one right on our front page.
Obviously.
So I think we just rework that example to work around this, just so that we don't sort of have our main example with optional sort of functionality in it. I think would be better.
Yeah, I agree with that. Everybody good with that?
But so the on the front, are you referring to like the get resource key there?
No, I'm talking about join.
Oh, the join.
So on the front page, yeah, the patient demographics example where we have like given names.
Okay, yeah, we can probably work it. The get resource key seems pretty fundamental, and that's under our control. But yeah, I think the join one we could probably find a way around.
Okay.
Yeah, we can probably just change this example to be similar in spirit, but just not using that function.
Yeah, sounds good. I actually need to drop at the half-hour mark, but yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll catch up with everyone later.
Okay. Well, this was useful to go through, I think. Just getting back to the agenda. Yeah. Any other thoughts about blockers or issues that need to be resolved pre-Milestone 1? Actually, I'm looking at the tag here. Do we still have the tag? I feel like we do for the GitHub issues. Let's see.
Yeah, well, the other thing I wanted to just sort of drill into a little bit more, just so that we understand the constraints we'll have once we cut a version, is, this whole status of tests as part of the spec, and also what version semantics we actually want to adopt. Like, going forward. So if we say this is V2, you know, what constitutes like a major minor patch change? What constitutes a breaking change? What will we hold ourselves to beyond cutting this version in terms of changing and changing the version and making a new release? You know, yeah, just so that's all clear. And perhaps it should be communicated a bit more clearly in the spec as well, you know, like what is normative, what is not, and what are the rules around how we change versions.
I would like to see like apply very simple rules. Don't do breaking changes with what we released as normative or whatever we call it. Not so we can mark something like draft optional. So we can break only stuff which we mark it as a draft or experimental. And if we released something like functions, so it's better for me not to release some function or not publish than break it. And as last dev days we discussed how many grief will bring us a FHIR breaking changes. So I would love to don't make any breaking change. Maybe we can go with a deprecation eventually if we make some real mistakes, but we don't do breaking changes, so we should be very careful with what is considered part of the spec, like required part. Yeah.
Okay, in response to that, my question is that really possible? First, and second is what do versions mean then? So if we be at version 2, or would we conceivably have a version 3 at some point? Or if we add features like, I don't know, like server operations or whatever, what would that be? Would that be like a 2.1 or would that be a 3? Or
do you think that we should publish it as a version 2? Yeah, okay, so we already have like 2 in the name of the spec. Yeah, it could be 2 probably, but then yeah, if we backward compatible, so it doesn't matter, so we can just use the second number for everything, like 2 dot.
I think I think we did make that decision. I believe it was from, you promoted it this year that this would be 2, we'd keep 1 stable, etc., because people do continue to rely on it. So that's, I think, a decision we made, but, we can discuss it. Yeah, if this is, what do the version numbers mean? So we're going to be fixing version 2, the major number, and then, the minor number becomes sort of the major iterations given, what John said. Let's say there's, server operations upcoming in the next 6 months or something. Would this version be basically 2.1 or I guess 2.0, and then, the version with server operations will be 2.1. Let's do it. I can't
We're
remember.
gonna be 2 forever unless we decide like break it completely.
Okay.
The fixed major version.
Yeah.
And use the rest.
Yeah, I guess on the version, my question goes a bit more back, I guess. I'm not sure why we decided not to have 0 as the leading digit, because to me, when it is 1, then it's kind of like a normative, or at least for software, it's like when you reach 1 is like, and I thought, now I'm looking, it's like I see that it says 200 pre, and I'm not sure where that pre is for the continuous build, maybe.
I think it's pre-release.
Pre-release, yeah. I don't know, maybe it's too late, but I if it was 0 point something, I would just say increase the second digit. That's it. And then when we are happy, when we think it's a normative version, then make it 1.0 something. But maybe
but the problem that we have a like SQL on FHIR v1.
That's what I thought.
It's completely different specs. So
2 comes from there.
Yes, I think that 2 is coming from that point that there's an ambiguity because there's a SQL on FHIR v1, so we do refer from the spec. So that's why we're going to be 2 forever, I think.
And I think that's fine. I think the most important thing is that, like you say, Nikolai, is that we don't break it, if at all possible. And if we did break it, I think it would effectively no longer be 2. But if it's possible, like it would be great if it could just, if this thing could be 2 basically forever, and we could have a policy that we don't break it and that we can layer on functionality within that, like using minor and patch releases to it, but they would be non-breaking changes within that major version series.
I think that's basically the Python policy. I'm remembering. I'm version number. I think, when it comes to this is like a, kind of social construct, right? And so I think as long as people understand it and are comfortable with it, we don't want to make a new versioning semantics, I think, and stick to one that's one that people are comfortable with. So 2, what I'm hearing is stay with 2, don't break it. But if we really, I guess, want to break it, it would increment the major and then use minor and patch for incremental to this stream of work.
And I think the expectation of most users of these things is roughly like semantic versioning, so if you have a major version of a thing, it should be stable. So I think we release what we think we can not break into the future under a 2 and just go from there. Yeah.
So have we actually published this anywhere, like with V2? I mean, the reason I'm asking this is that I feel that, when this group started working like over a year ago, the thinking was a little bit different in the sense that, it was the second version of SQL on FHIR. But now I guess we have established that, these 2 things are kind of separate. So you can have like for full FHIR resources, you can still project them into Parquet and databases and things like that. And this tool is for creating views. So these are for 2 different purposes, in my opinion. And what I'm saying is that, if we haven't fixed this V2 anywhere, I personally prefer if we actually go back and make this like a V0 and then it's normative V1.
I mean, in that case, I think you'd have to change the name, right? Like that would be my thought, just because it's a conflict. Like you're calling
for
Yeah, that the clash for SQL on FHIR, not about the version. Yes, but the SQL on FHIR is too good to don't use
marketing.
In marketing and promoting. I think V2.
Actually, no, because you see, the discussion that we had last week, for example, with Parquet schema.
Yeah.
I see that as a development of the V1 of the the wide schema, let's call it.
Yeah, and it probably will become the part of our V2 version as well when we finalize it. So we still have this layers or ability. We just decided to focus on what's really interoperable and like low hanging fruit, and the view definition looks like that. Yes, because it gives us this power.
Yeah, I can imagine when like the current spec has a few different aspects to it, like it might be server behavior, it might be like bulk operations or whatever. There could be some stuff with the data layer in there. We could do that. Yeah, I don't really see it as a huge problem as long as we have, versions that are meaningful and we stick to the semantics. I think I had a chat going back to the original question, I had a chat to Graham about like where we can publish this. And he said that like a link like I just sort of published in the chat would be where we could put it. So you effectively have our continuous IG build, and then you'd have that little notice up the top which says, this is the continuous integration build. Here's the directory of published versions. And then you get a list of published versions, and then we'd have like a V2 in that list or whatever. And that would link to this sort of stable URL with our published thing. So we would effectively have the build.fire.org version we have now as our CI one, and then this hl7.org/fire one as the published one. I think that's kind of what we're shooting for. And then if we do another version down the track, we can, yeah.
What UV means in URL, so fire/UV?
I'm not really sure. That's what he suggested. And I'm guessing another component there, like that there'll have to be like a suffix on that as well, similar to what the FHIR path has with their N1 or whatever. So we'll probably have like a 2 or whatever at the end of that. But as long as we have like a place to sort of put a stable version of the spec.
Yeah, I think that'll be fine. We don't have our publishing experts on the call who've done this before, so it's a little new to us, but it sounds fine. I just wanted to just speak to Bashir's point, or like, this is a little theoretical at this point, but I could see potentially in the future that the V1 spec, right, becomes one option, let's say, to disambiguate the 2 would be to change V1, right? Change its name or its aspect, or incorporate it in some way. So I'm just saying that there's potentially more than one option. And I mean, I think we're pretty aligned, but if we took this current work and put it to V0, I think it would just be very, that would be just as confusing probably to folks. So I think there are options to disambiguate, and then if the V1 spec becomes more about the data layer, right, or expands or grows in that way, then that could use potentially a naming change. That was a thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, in semantic versioning spec, like yes, zero is used to some sort of pre-release thing. And so zero has some semantics to it, but all other integers beyond that have no connotation, right? So it's not like some sort of measure of maturity or something. It's just a monotonically increasing integer. So pick one. It doesn't matter as long as you follow the rules about changing it, I guess. So I don't think we want to go to zero because we want to actually release something that is not pre-release. And we don't want to use one. And I don't know, some people might get bothered by that, but I don't really see a problem with it as long as it's a number that we can use and we follow the rules around it and sort of breaking changes and changes to the version. And then we declare what those semantics are and stick to them. I think it's fine.
That sounds good. All right, thumbs up from Bashir. I'm thinking of OS 10. So, okay, I think we have some decisions here. Stick with 2 as this stream, and then there's a couple other decisions which I've noted about changing the front page example, adding optional tags to tests, and I think we can work with Graham and the folks on stable release URLs, etc. I think if there's any other publishing, I don't know what the next steps are for once we've made those edits in terms of publishing. Because we have a version on the build server at this point, and we're talking about moving it to a different server. I don't quite track that, John.
So I think there's an action to follow up with Graham as to what the process is for publishing a version, but I think it's different to what we have now. Like what we have now is like a hook that publishes to like a area. This is more like taking a snapshot of the published version, like the published rendering of a tag, and then just putting it somewhere forever and just leaving it there. And there is a process for that, apparently, that Graham's going to get back to me on how we actually do that. But I think what will happen is we will sort of decide we're finished, declare victory, add a tag to our repo, and then we will build the spec at that tag and upload it somewhere, and then it will be available this second URL, which is like a stable URL. And we'll also do this IG magic to sort of make it display the directory of published versions and stuff in our CM build. So I think there's an action to follow up with Graham and figure out how to do all that.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's something that I can help out with as well, potentially. So I'll put that for you and me, and maybe if we need further help, if we have Graham. But of course, I think Dan and Josh know how to do this stuff too. So, but let's you and I work on that together, John, and then so we have a couple of people who know how that process works. Okay, sounds good. All right, a lot of publishing housekeeping. Any other outstanding topics on that or anything else that we want to discuss in the next 8 minutes? I did have some notes about I haven't had a chance to do too much work on, but I know John and I discussed from the last call a time and frequency for the Parquet group. We do want to be more inclusive of folks in India, like Bashir mentioned last time. So we are trying to figure out what a time that spans basically the whole world might work.
I would say, do we want, and maybe John, if you drive that, maybe that's the best option because, you have like a nice proposal and everything. Do we want, I'm not sure. If you want to continue with this group, I think that's an option as well. I have told Chandra, and we want to
this
have a
meeting,
separate group.
you're saying, Bashir.
Yeah, this meeting, yeah. If we want to create like a separate, like a subgroup and a separate meeting, then let's see who is interested to attend that. And then we create that subgroup and then make a decision on the time.
Okay.
So there are like 2 options. Just continue. If many people who are in here are interested in following the discussion, which I'm not sure if this is the case, we can just use this time. Otherwise, we create like a subgroup, and then in that subgroup, we decide on a time.
Yeah, what are folks' thoughts about this?
I would suggest to keep it as a one group unless we feel that we should split it. Yes.
Ask on Zulip and see how many
Yeah,
people are
let's vote on.
interested.
Yes. So
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. But vote for a subgroup with a separate meeting time, or
Yeah,
keep one.
and frequency. Yeah.
Okay, I'll add a note for me to do that.
I think the only time that was even in the ballpark that I could come up with was 7 a.m. US Eastern, which would obviously probably exclude a lot of people in the US probably, because if you want to actually make it a reasonable time for India, Australia, Europe and US, your options are starting to get thinner.
Yeah, it's basically there is no option. I mean, if you think about, I mean, 7 a.m. Eastern time is like 4 a.m. like West Coast, right? So it's like for many people who are from Midwest to the West, it's probably hard to attend. Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you want to, keep for the whole group, then it's probably impossible to come up with a better time. But also, I mean, let's see if there are, if everyone is actually interested with this group for the parquet discussion.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, I think it depends on sort of the workload here, but if we are nearing a milestone release, like I think my sense is we'll have enough time to fit in those discussions during this meeting. So, okay, I will put up a poll to vote on subgroup, and similarly for MOP, I think it's pretty much the same question. Do we want to consider having a subgroup for that? So I can also just put up a poll for an OMOP subgroup, or keep it as one main group. Okay, cool. We'll do the same.
A quick question, Arjun, for you. So you and your folks are on the West Coast?
I'm on the East Coast. Yeah, Pennsylvania.
And then other people from your team?
So Alex is East Coast. Most NCQA is East Coast.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one guy who lives in California.
Yeah, is this a topic? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm West Coast, the U.S.
Oh, Shane, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess you are interested in that discussion too, Shane, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I get it. I understand. It's like we have to kind of balance worldwide interest as well. So.
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. I will put up those polls. Anything else in the last couple of minutes? Review, right? We have the review sheet out there. I will definitely post for folks to go through the review sheet.
That's my to-do list after
That's
vacation.
on you.
As well, I almost finished the post about the functional model, so I will share the final result with you guys, and maybe we will incorporate it into the spec.
Yeah, John said that was already in there, but I didn't see it. Maybe I don't know. I feel like that's still outstanding.
Yeah, maybe I'm just not up with it. But so what are you working on in the functional model side of things, Nikolai?
I mean, this idea that we can understand the view definition as a functions and composition of these functions. So it's kind of like interpretation of the view definition, and what some guys found useful that it's essentially that's how JavaScript implementation is done. So it's useful for implementers to have some mental model, so how it works, what every function means. So I write it once, so now I almost rewritten it with a bunch of samples. Maybe it can be merged with the main specification, I don't know. So, but yeah, I will show you, and you will decide. Does it deserve like separate page, or it can be merged into the view definition description?
Okay, sounds good. All right, looks like we're at the end. All right, good conversation. So have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you. See ya.